Good morning. My name is Cameron McElhenney, and I serve as the Director of Training and Education for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I would like to thank you for coming to today's series where we'll be discussing the issues surrounding youth and law enforcement. This is a program initiated by the Denver office of the Independent Monitor and how you can establish this in your own community. Before I turn things over to today's presenters, I would like to go over a few things regarding today's program. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted. As soon as we begin, however, you will have the ability to type in any questions you might have for Chief Payson or Ms. Orlando. When we come to the question and answer portion of the webinar, your questions will be asked and answered as they have been received. During the webinar, you may also send any questions you might have for me as the webinar administrator in the same manner, and I will answer your questions as quickly as possible. At the conclusion of the webinar, each of you will be given an opportunity to complete a brief survey on today's event. If you could please take a few moments to complete the survey, it will help us as we move forward with enhancing and expanding our webinar series. With our housekeeping duties out of the way, I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. Chief Paul Payson was sworn in as Chief of Police for the Denver Police Department in July of this year. He began serving the community in 1995 and since has worked to enhance police services, create an environment of team building, collaboration, and fostering innovative crime prevention strategies while instituting transparency and accountability and empowering residents and sustainable community police relations. Gia Orlando is the Community Relations Ombudsman for the Denver office of the Independent Monitor. She is responsible for outreach to Denver residents, elected officials, community leaders, and organizations. Hearing the community call for better relations between youth and law enforcement, she spearheaded the creation of the Youth Outreach Project, Bridging the Gap, Kids and Cops. She secured federal grant funding, oversaw the development of the curriculum, and convened an expert advisory panel to guide the process. She's also a member of the NACOLE Board of Directors. With that, I will now turn today's webinar over to Gia and Chief Payson.
Good morning. So I just we're going to go ahead and start with the slide presentation, and I encourage people to actually butt in and ask questions as we go. Go ahead, Jude. Or technical difficulties. I want to actually drive home the fact that this was a joint venture between the Denver Police Department and the Office of the Independent Monitor in Denver. There are three co-founders per se. Nicholas Mitchell is not able to join us today, but Commander Paul Payson, myself, and Nicholas Mitchell actually began this program back in 2013 when we started hearing this call for better I want to talk just for a second about the role of the Office of the Independent Monitor. I assume that we're probably talking about mostly oversight agencies that are participating in the webinar. So, you know, I'm not going to read from this, but generally the Office of the Independent Monitor in Denver actually oversees both the police department as well as the sheriff's department, which is largely correctional. We actively monitor and participate in investigations. We make recommendations to the manager of safety, chief of police, sheriff, and also to the mayor and others regarding safety issues in the city and county of Denver. We only have the power of recommendation, and we make recommendations regarding greater policy issues on a regular basis. So the Kids and Cops program actually came from you know, one of those policy areas where we felt like we needed some increased understanding and some proactive nature to the work. In 2013, which is when I really began in this office, I noticed a really sharp uptick or high number of youth-related concerns that came through parents and guardians, that through not only our office, but when we were out in the community, that basically related, you know, low-level kind of interactions between officers and youth in Denver around miscommunication and misunderstanding. You know, you'd have a youth that didn't understand why they were being stopped, you know, were trying to exercise their rights, but didn't really understand what their rights were, didn't understand what their responsibilities were. And then you had officers that were treating youth like adults, right? Expecting them to comply with commands that, you know, adolescent brains weren't hearing and weren't responding to. And when we really got into the meat of some of those investigations, when complaints were issued, we realized that pretty much everybody in those contact situations was at fault. You know, youth didn't understand their responsibilities. Officers didn't understand adolescent development and didn't go out of their way to make sure that kids were hearing what they were saying and understanding why they were asking them to do the things that they were doing. So you may want to ask yourselves, because you're mostly oversight professionals, why oversight? And I think, you know, I want to make sure that Chief Payson chimes in on this, but basically oversight adds a really unique perspective to this situation, right? We work really closely with the department on a number of different issues, including investigations and policy issues. You know, when we started this program, we were actually ahead of a lot of the social conditions that quickly followed. So Ferguson hadn't developed yet. Kids weren't walking out of classes during this particular issue when we actually started seeing that there needed to be some work done. But that followed as soon as we actually were applying for money. So it was a timely development that actually led us to this. And so in 2014, we, you know, talked to the Denver Police Department. Chief was actually a commander at that point and was fully on board. And we got a Colorado Justice Assistance Grant, which is basically a federal grant that's passed through the Department of Public Safety here in Colorado. And I'd actually really like to turn it over to Chief Payson to talk about why this is actually important for oversight to spearhead.
So, and the reason from our perspective that it is important that this currently is housed in oversight is that credibility with the community. It's one thing for law enforcement to come in and say, hey, we want to enhance our relationships with young people, and that's just one piece of the puzzle. When you have folks that are on the opposite end of a spectrum working together to try to do something about low-level contacts turning into high-level uses of force, it is a challenge for all sides, law enforcement as well as the oversight groups, and it enhances our ability to deliver services to the community, and it's just the opening to the community. It gives greater access if we are using this model coming from an oversight perspective.
Thank you. So I want to go into the mission of the Youth Outreach Project, also known as Bridging the Gap Kids and Cops. You know, proactive in terms of what we actually intended to accomplish when we started this program. We wanted to educate youth on their rights and their responsibilities when in contact with law enforcement. We wanted to make sure that officers were being educated on adolescent development, disproportionate minority contact, implicit bias, and also they actually get quite a bit of de-escalation technique, not meaning physical de-escalation, but understanding actually how to kind of motivationally interview the youth that they're actually on the streets trying to have conversations with, whether it's around an investigation or whether it's just, you know, saying hi, right? That there's different ways that you actually address. And then we do that by convening forums with facilitated dialogue between youth and officers, and we'll get into how we actually facilitate that. But the real goal here is increased public safety. When people actually feel like they're being treated fairly, they actually comply with laws and utilize public safety in a much safer and fairer manner.
Correct.
You want to talk about the officer training just a little bit? We're going to get into that a little bit heavier, but for our big forum training, I just want to say that officers and community members are trained in advance of these convenings with the youth, and the officer training is paramount to the success of this program.
So when we first came together on this, we looked at a lot of different models. skills from across the country. And really the one that rose to the top was this effective interactions with youth training. It's evidence-based and came from Connecticut. It's been evaluated by the University of Connecticut. This is some training that officers get, 8 hours of training where officers are introduced to some of these key concepts. Their role as gatekeepers in the school to prison pipeline, how these low-level issues can mount and create major issues for young people and then, you know, really that adolescent brain development, introducing officers to DMC and relative rate index. It's important that the officers on the street, officers in the schools, that they know and understand their role and the impact that they have. So setting the table for them prior to a forum, a very powerful forum, just gets them ready to and gives them awareness to many of these challenges that young people are facing.
So the officers are trained in advance of the forums, and so are the community facilitators. We do full-day trainings for community members that are interested in facilitating the dialogue between youth and officers. They get, and we'll go through the list of all of the different kind of curriculum components, but more or less they will get at least 4 hours of basic facilitation skills training. And we partner with an organization, a nonprofit organization in Denver called the Conflict Center that teaches dispute resolution and all kinds of conflict resolution stuff, as well as restorative justice and other kind of key components of what we consider to be important to our curriculum. And so everybody that actually would like to participate in the forums and would like to help guide the conversations between youth and officers must go through that facilitator training before they, and then they're mentored along the way, but before they're even able to consider themselves ready for the forums with the youth and the officers, they go through that training.
So this is some great progress for our department. Since May of 2015, 351 officers have received this training. And these are officers that are in parts of our city that are going to have the greatest impact with young people. We have school resource officers were trained, as well as precinct officers from all different shifts. We have different levels of supervision that have been trained in this. And key to our training moving forward is we now have 20 officers that are certified as train-the trainers. We are focused on and committed to training at least 100 officers per year, each year moving forward. So they get this critical information, this awareness, that implicit bias, adolescent brain development, DMC, and that, as we said, prepares them for the. But they also get additional training while they are in those forums, and this training enhances what they've already learned. That way, they're better equipped to interact with young people, understand how that young brain develops, and what is true pushback, what is young people being afraid, and how that manifests itself. So it's really helped us quite a bit, and now we have a sustainable model that we're able to move forward and train the rest of our department.
And just to give you some perspective, that 351 number for officers that have been trained since 2015 is about a third of the patrol force. So this, continuing to train officers each year going forward not only takes care of attrition, but also will get us closer to getting all of the patrol officers trained in Denver in the next several years. So the facilitator training is actually offered to anybody in the community that's interested in participating in these conversations. So, we have a wide range of individuals that have come to us, from insurance brokers to educators to parents that wanted to participate with their kids in the forums, but then came back and got trained to be able to do this work. To date, we actually have 158 youth and adults that have been trained. 46 of them are youth and young adults, and 112 are people of color and reflect the population of Denver. So we actually have a very good pool of facilitators that to draw from every time we have a forum. They come from all different areas of Denver, and some are interested in youth and youth-related stuff. Some of them come from a background of actually police accountability and oversight. So it's a wide range of people with different interests in improving these relationships between law enforcement and youth. When I told you I would give you that list, it's actually really hard for me to remember all of them, but the list is in front of you. So facilitators and officers during the forums get facilitation skills training, emotional intelligence, mental health first aid for youth, positive youth development, trauma-informed practice, restorative practice, implicit bias, introduction to Islam, and we are just now introducing motivational interviewing. And I'll tell you about the kind of agenda and what the day looks like during the forums, but basically facilitators and officers have 2 hours during the forums where they're trained on different one of these components almost every time. So we rotate the trainings. There's plenty of people that have had more than one, but it kind of adds to the conversation when somebody's in the room that has had the same training twice. So the youth training happens during the 5-hour forums, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands 5 hours is pretty much as long as our youth advisory committee would allow us to have the forums. The youth that we actually target are 13 to 18-year-olds, and as a side note, we also have a parent track that we run a lot of the same curriculum with parents, and we also have a young adult track that's been modified slightly that actually goes up to 24-year-olds, 19 to 24-year-olds. But the youth training happens during the forums. Kids are not pre-trained before they come into the forum, so they come in authentically youth with all of the same, kinds of concerns and questions and fear and all of that good stuff. So kids come in, they get constitutional rights training, they get laws related to youth contacts. And one of the things that came up really regularly in the early forums was marijuana. We had just legalized marijuana in Colorado, and so we actually have a special part of the curriculum, of their constitutional curriculum, that relates to laws specific to marijuana and youth. We also do implicit bias training with the youth, and they get a good dose of proper police practice, meaning they get an opportunity to understand why police do some of the things that they do, and how to actually make sure not to escalate when they're in contact with police, around keeping hands out of their pockets, keeping hands on the wheel, all of that good stuff. As of 2 weeks ago, we are now at about 1,400 youth that have participated in 37 separate forums since 2015. The agenda for the forums is in front of you. I guess the things that I want to pull out is the fact that we provide an environment that's very conducive to youth being able to participate and really get something from it. So we start every forum off with a cultural presentation. We have a hip hop artist and spoken word artist that's on staff and is responsible for emceeing these forums. He's also a facilitator. He's wonderful. So the kids walk in, officers walk in. Usually they're on separate sides of the room. No matter how many times officers have gone through no matter how many times officers have gone through the forums, they still wait for their, for their peers in the parking lot across the street. They all walk in together, and kids feel the same exact way. They walk in, they stay as far away from the officers as possible. And there's all good reasoning for both of those things, right? Maybe not so much the officers, but we work through it. There's a welcome during that cultural, right after the cultural presentation. We do an overview of the forum, we set expectations, we do breathing exercises and kind of get into the mood to be open and participate. You then go one direction and they get constitutional rights training and implicit bias training. And the reason youth get implicit bias training is so that they're actually able and empowered to talk about race, because race inevitably for many of them has to do with the way that they feel treated by officers. And so we want to actually kind of mainline that conversation and be able to actually bring race into the conversation. Officers and facilitators go the other direction, and they get one of the other component trainings that we talked about in the last slide. So that's the morning part of the session. Everybody, when they arrive in the morning, actually gets assigned to a small group, even though the small groups don't get together until the breaking bread or lunch piece of the agenda. So when youth walk in the door, they are already designated into a colored group. So light blue has 7 to 10 kids, 1 or 2 facilitators, and 1 officer already pre-assigned. Everybody has colored lanyards. There's colored tablecloths where they're going to be having lunch and also doing their report back at the end of the day. So they kind of get into their groups starting at lunchtime. This is lightly facilitated unless a facilitator needs to get more involved. It's informal speak. It's the time when kids ask officers about how much they like donuts, and sometimes it actually is much deeper than that, and they ask if they've ever had to shoot anybody, but really it's people learning each other's names, having really very informal light conversation, kind of getting used to having being able to talk to each other before they actually go into their small group circles. We call those the kids and cops circles. They actually last for about an hour and a half, and that's where it's actually where the facilitators really come into play and set expectations for what the group does. Everybody signs on for how they want their groups to run. Some of the facilitators actually start right off the bat by doing role play. Some of them actually try and find commonalities. Some of them just ask for people to share their experiences during police youth and contacts on the street. All of that actually is meant to just start having a conversation. By the time those kids and cop circles start winding down, they're expected to come back to the larger group with 3 different Post-it notes. One is tips for officers when interacting with youth on the street. One is tips for youth when interacting with officers on the street. And one is it's titled Next Steps, but it really encompasses all of the pieces of the conversation around utilizing public safety and how we continue to have these conversations that leave the door open to, not only kids feeling like policing is fair, but also having, a stake in the public safety in their neighborhoods and in their families. After they actually complete those 3 Post-its in their circles, people are actually elected and or volunteer right off the bat to come and do report back. The groups get up one at a time. Usually we try and work with about 50 kids, so that's about 70 groups. And report back happens through our MC. Each of the groups is called up and they walk through each of their Post-it notes. And by the second or third group reporting out, you actually have themes, right? Everybody is looking at the same thing. Tips for cops or tips for kids, you're looking at everybody wanting respect, everybody wanting good communication, everybody wanting things to go smoothly and to have good understanding, right? So you're not seeing a difference between what cops expect the kids expect of cops, right? And when kids start identifying those themes, it's like light bulbs going off for them. That really we're all looking for the same kinds of calm and effective interaction when it comes to community members and law enforcement. We do evaluations at that point. Youth receive certificates of participation, and then we do a closing exercise and sometimes another piece of the cultural piece.
So really the structure and the format are great. I mean, that's how it's facilitated to get to the conversation. But the kids and cop circles is really where that magic occurs. That's where the breaking down of the barriers takes place. And that's where the light bulb moments often occur, not just for young people, not just for officers, but for all in the group. And that's the important part. This is a very balanced approach, very balanced way to engage in meaningful dialogue that breaks through surface level discussions and gets to the meat of the issues that we've had here. We've had young people break down and cry. We've had adult officers that are breaking down and getting emotional over many of these issues. But really, that's where the magic occurs. But that structure and format has to be there in the first place to get us to the magic.
Absolutely. So you may, wonder where we actually get our youth and our facilitators as well. We work extensively with the community, both in the schools and as well as with after-school programs and neighborhood associations and neighborhood organizations. We generally are looking for youth of color because they generally have more contact with police in Denver. There are two specific areas where there's more contact with law enforcement for those two communities. One is out in Northeast Denver, one is out in Southwest Denver, and then we have a whole downtown scene that youth are actually caught up with officers quite a bit. So we wanted to make sure and target the youth that are actually more apt to be contacted by police. 13 to 18-year-old youth were the initial target. Then we developed a program for 19 to 24-year-olds, young adults. So we work with the community, the local community college to recruit them there. We talked about the highly policed neighborhoods of Northeast and Southwest. Under the current chief, we hope that actually, and the work that we're doing with this programming, that actually changes a little bit. And he can talk about that a little bit more. We also really identified immigrant populations as ones that actually needed to be targeted with our programming. Number one, because they have a very different experience and maybe more apt to avoid police endeavor and not utilize public safety. So we really make sure that we get a good I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but a good number of immigrant youth as well as young adults and parents that actually participate in our programming so that they are able to understand, know officers and utilize public safety the way that everybody else does. I think, yeah, I mean, if you want to go to the next one. This is real quick for those of you that aren't in Colorado. You don't really need to know, but it's a good spattering of organizations and schools that we've worked with for those 37 forums. So officers and youth are actually evaluated, and I'll let Chief Payson actually speak to the kind of light bulb moments that have happened with the officers.
So almost to a person, the officers that go through this, it opens and broadens their perspective. Oftentimes in law enforcement, you're dealing with some of the worst or some ugly situations that officers have to see and deal with every single day. And over time, officers can become jaded by this. This is an opportunity for us to broaden that perspective and really re-engage to this profession in the first place, and interacting with young people, hearing young people's stories, having that small group work, the circles that they are in, and the experiences that these young people have had with law enforcement, that their family members have had, really opens up their eyes. And as you can read, there are several quotes that we have here from individual officers, but even from officers that come from that community perspective. A community resource officer, and his quote's not listed here, somebody that I've long considered that knows, understands, and gets it. When somebody like that is exposed to this and they have their own light bulb moment of, oh, okay, I understand what this young person is facing day in and day out. I understand better how we can engage in meaningful conversation, and that those areas of contention, the respect, the treatment, that we can improve those long term with our young people moving forward. So for us, this has been invaluable here in the forums, here with the young people that we're interacting with. But it's really opening our officers' eyes, broadening their perspective, and helping us do a better job of policing the entire community.
Great. So youth actually have, the stories that come out of these forums are just, you know, both really exciting as well as really heartbreaking. You know, generally when we started the program, we really wanted kids to walk away with a toolkit that they used when they had interactions with officers that would keep everyone safe, you know, keep them out of the juvenile justice system, that would allow them to get questions answered and allow for better communication. What we actually have been able to garner from all of the evaluations is that most kids actually appreciate not only learning their rights, their constitutional rights, but also actually talking to an officer one-on-one and understanding how they're trained and why they became officers and why they're committed to public safety endeavors, right? So, you know, we're not looking for the kumbaya. We definitely didn't think that even 50% of the kids would walk away with, you know, with much other than a few tools to actually help them get through these interactions without being arrested or getting summoned. And what we found is that kids actually really, really wanted to have these experiences. What they were asking for was more positive interactions with officers and to be able to ask questions and understand what was going on, not only with themselves during interactions or during contacts, but also with you know, people that in their families and people in their communities that had police interactions. So, you know, by the end of the day, people are actually, everyone involved, facilitators, officers, and youth, are able to actually have those conversations, get questions answered. We are not looking for, you know, buddy or, you know, necessarily to have everybody always get along and remember each other's names. We're looking for safety. We're looking for a better understanding of how public safety works, and we're looking for people to invest in better relations so that public safety actually works for all communities and not just communities, you know, middle class and up communities that regularly take advantage of public safety benefits in the first place. As of October 15th, we became officially evidence-based. We had an evaluator that was working for 2 years on understanding exactly what people were getting from all of this. There was a 13% improvement in perceptions of the character of police officers by youth. There was an 11+% improvement in perceptions that police in general act in a fair and unbiased manner. There was a almost 13% improvement in the perceived fairness of police decision-making during interactions, and an 18% improvement in perceptions of treatment by neighborhood police. And finally, an almost 15% improvement in the likelihood of cooperating with police. And I'm not talking about, you know, necessarily, you know, is one of those words that can be really misunderstood. Cooperating means taking advantage of public safety, that they would actually answer questions and otherwise report to the police as any other resident. When we started this program, this wasn't even one of the outcomes that we actually foresaw having as part of this. We thought that we could actually make everybody safer, keep kids out of the juvenile justice system. We did not actually understand that the power of the program was really to change people's perceptions. Now, these are not this was not a long-term study, but it was a study that was done with a control group, and the researchers are very comfortable with these double-digit numbers that actually show that we're moving the dial that we're moving the needle on youth and police interaction in Denver. We do hope to be able to launch another longer-term study that shows that kids are staying out of the system, that fewer juvenile arrests are happening, all of that good stuff. And finally, I guess the only thing that I would throw in there is that as of the end of this month, we actually have a wraparound study that's being done that's a little bit softer on in terms of it's not a statistical study nearly so much as it's, help me with this,
Quantitative or qualitative?
Yes.
Qualitative.
This guy's in school still.
Qualitative study.
So they've done focus groups, and they've actually done individual interviews with officers as well as facilitators to wrap them into our evaluation. So we should be able to distribute that very soon as well. Yeah. So one of the most important things that we did with this whole project was convening a youth project advisory committee, our YPAC, at the very beginning. So we got educators and law enforcement and other city organizations, and then a huge number of community organizations at the table. They met quarterly when we were initially starting out with our technical assistance group, which was a subgroup of the PAC, meeting monthly to actually help us create the curriculum, to decide, how we were actually, what components were going to be involved, how we were actually going to roll it out, who wasn't at the table, the kinds of recruitment techniques that we needed to use, everything that had to do with a decision that was made for the curriculum or for the rollout of the program through our YPAC. And we continue to actually meet with them on a quarterly basis. There have been up to 45 different groups that have participated in the Youth Project Advisory Committee. And every time we make any kind of change or add some kind of piece to it, like the young adult curriculum or the parent track curriculum, we actually go to them and ask their advice on that and get their feedback. A good number of them also participated in their strategic planning this year, as well as our follow-up to the strategic planning, which will be released in the next couple of months. So we do have a plan for 2, 3, and 5 years out for how we actually help many of you to be able to take advantage of this programming. The schools, individual schools, have begun scheduling forums during the regular school day, as opposed to us always trying to schedule after school or on a Saturday, which we consider to actually be a huge win. When we first started this work, it was incredibly difficult to actually, figure out how to schedule kids and then figure out how to incentivize them to be there when they didn't have to be there. So now that schools are understanding the benefits of this programming, they've begun scheduling during the day. There is a police executive research forum case study that's out there that I don't know if it went out with the materials that we sent or can go out after this, but we're happy to get you linked up to that case study. It also very much praised the programming and the way that it was being done and the deep dives that were being taken. Like I said, we piloted 2 other pieces of this programming this last year. Did you have anything else to add to this?
So the PERF case study is a big deal in law enforcement. Police Executive Research Forum does high-level academic dives into programming that law enforcement agencies are looking at. The fact that this was published as a report for other cities to look at, to replicate, to emulate is a great thing for us from the police department side of things. And really it helped us as we on the law enforcement can then expand our ability not only here locally but also in other jurisdictions on why this is an important program, why this is something that is wise to replicate.
And also that PERF case study was actually funded by the DOJ. Just wanted to throw that out there. So this program, so Denver actually responded to the My Brother's Keeper Challenge by President Obama back in, I want to say, 2015. That sound about right to everybody in the room? And we quickly became there's 4 focus areas, and I won't name all of them, but one of them was the juvenile justice system, and we quickly became the STAR initiative for keeping kids out of the juvenile justice system and keeping them non-system involved. So that was actually a really big deal in Denver, and we continue to be part of that and continue to participate and collaborate with all of the other organizations trying to do juvenile justice reform and keep kids out of the system. knowing that kids that go into the system as kids have a 70% chance of ending up back in the system as adults. And then we just have glorious pictures that we can put through really quickly. You know, if you can imagine going from the beginning of the day when nobody wants to look at each other, nobody wants to actually have a conversation, to the end of the day when people actually feel really empowered, especially our kids knowing their rights and understanding what their responsibilities are, both in terms of public safety and also in terms of police contacts, is just incredibly powerful. And we have a great crew of people who do this. There are, in the Office of the Independent Monitor, there are actually 4 people that work on this program, one of them part-time, and then of course I actually have other responsibilities in the office. And then on the part of the police department, officers are actually you know, recruited for the training and they're recruited for the forums, but they volunteer and then they are actually paid off-duty time. So they volunteer to be trained, they volunteer to actually participate in the forums, but they are trained. So I just wanted a couple of questions that always come up.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's important that we do this work. It's also important that we do not take officers off the street. So public safety is what we're talking about right from the beginning of this presentation, and to take 7 officers off the street for 5 hours. That's why we figured out different ways, different models in order to ensure that we're not negatively impacting the rest of the city as these progress.
Absolutely. And also it just means the world when officers volunteer, and you know, it's always different officers, and there's an opportunity for officers from around its entire county to be able to participate in the program. At this point, I'm absolutely ready to take some questions. I have one in front of me that says, how would you suggest beginning a program like this in other cities? And I would just throw out there that we worked really hard to get this particular curriculum perfect for the outcomes that we were looking for in Denver. I imagine that some things could actually probably change, but I would offer that that almost anything you would want to change about it, I would have some pushback from our YPAC about why you should not do it that way. Like, a lot of people try and take the 5 hours and drop it down to 1 or 2 hours at a time. You can't do that because of the change that happens during the day, really authentically from the morning to the afternoon. You know, how uncomfortable it is from the beginning, and then the empowerment that happens, and then the uncomfortableness of actually sitting with officers, and then actually doing the one-on-one work, which, by the way, through the evaluations, that the kids in cop circles are the most revered time during the day for both officers and kids. And we never thought that that was actually going to be the case, but it is. That's where they actually say that their favorite time is during those kids in cop circles. So in terms of starting a program like this, I would say that number one, you need to actually find like-minded people to start figuring out who should be at the table. Lots of community members, lots of educators and schools. And then, of course, you have to have law enforcement at the table from the very beginning. They have to want to actually be trained. They have to want to participate, and you all have to problem solve around what, you know, how you're gonna make the money to make this happen. Each of our forums, by the time officers, oh, I never said this about the facilitator training, but facilitators are actually paid to train, and then they're paid to actually deliver. And they're small stipends. They're by no means is it, you know, real money, but it's something that covers parking and food and all that good stuff for their time during the day. So by the time you've paid officers, you've paid facilitators, and you convene with small, with hot meals, both for breakfast and for lunch, you're really talking about very close to, you know, $3,000 for each of the forums. So it really takes that advisory committee and law enforcement doing some serious, you know, problem solving around where that money is going to come from and how they're going to work together and setting some norms. So that would be my first step. Second step would be to actually get some officers trained. And we can talk to jurisdictions about how we actually went beyond that and who they need to talk to in terms of the officer training. Cami, are there other questions?
There are some additional questions. The first one we have is, I understand the qualitative outcome measures are positive. Do you have any, or are you anticipating looking at quantitative outcomes, say in reduction in number of police encounters with youth and others?
Absolutely. I think, you know, our biggest concern at the beginning was, you know, of course, doing this work, we get pushback from everybody, right? So we got pushback from the community about putting kids and cops together in the first place. We got pushback from the police department about spending these kind of resources without grant funding and taking officers off the streets, right? So at every stage of development, I believe we actually overcame a lot of that. But part of the reason why we really wanted a short-term, quick evaluation of how effective our work was to be able to answer some of the critics about the work that we knew was actually doing a lot of really impressive perception changing in Denver. So we are looking for those much more in-depth evaluation, grant money, I assume. But yes, there's plans for all of that going forward, and we're already working with other jurisdictions that would like to see this in their areas, and so that I would assume that some of them would actually be looking for evaluation money as well.
Great. The next question is the data and the outcome evaluation available to those looking to try and sell a program like this to their city administrators?
Absolutely. It's in the last stage of draft. Right now, we just had we pushed back on the way that they were describing some of the programming to make sure that it was the same as the way that we described the programming, not the data. We never pushed back on the data. The data's clean, the data's there. So anybody who's interested in seeing that probably should hit me up by the 15th of January, and I'm happy to send that out to everybody. And I'm sure it will be on our website as well.
Thank you. The next question is, if officers have to volunteer for training, how can you be sure that those undergoing training are the ones who need it most?
So we focus, like Gia said, in specific areas of the city. And you know, part of this is also grant funding on the police department side. So those partnerships, establishing those partnerships are critical from the get-go. This is not something that one of the partners pays for exclusively. We're continuing to find different ways of how we can get these things covered. But as far as getting the right officers to volunteer for training and volunteer for the forums, we're intentional on the focus areas where we have the biggest need, if that helps answer that question. So it's not random, it's intentional and focused.
And it's also officer driven, right? So, you know, you'll have a group of officers that actually really feel strongly about it, and they talk to all of their peers, and, you know, you'll get officers to get on board. I'll go a little bit further, though, than Commander Payson actually did. So even though he was, chief, and it's going to take me a while, he actually just got appointed in July. When Chief Payson was Commander Payson and had a district, he took it upon himself to get every one of his 140 officers trained in this curriculum, because he felt really strongly that they needed it and that they would benefit from it and they would do better on the streets, having gone through it. We have two other commanders that actually are committed to the same thing. Those 351 officers are actually concentrated in a couple of different areas, but there also are officers both from all of the different districts as well as from different ranks in that number of 351. And what we really hope is that, you know, in another 2.5, 3 years, that all officers with, you know, that have any contact with the public that are not sitting behind a desk will actually be trained in this curriculum. And the curriculum itself, so I'll also throw out that there's an implication that that there's some officers that need it more than other officers, and that's great. I think that actually all officers benefit from the curriculum. But I will say that there's some officers, and just as there's some facilitators, that no matter how much they are exposed to the curriculum, they still don't have the skills to necessarily be in the forums with kids in those emotional settings. And that goes for facilitators as well. It's a really difficult thing to actually be in that situation and trying to be authentic and dealing with kids that have had major trauma around officer interactions, both themselves and their families, and have people that are not equipped socially to deal with those issues. So there's some people that are never allowed to actually be on their own in those small group settings with kids. And that's why we have the mentoring. That's why people are kind of vetted before we send them in. Officers oftentimes will get an officer that has more experience that will go into their groups with them. Facilitators always have a more experienced facilitator that start them out in the facilitation circles, just because it's really rough work. And like Chief Payson actually has said before, we've had some traumatic issues that have happened within these small group situations. We've had officers talk about officer-involved shootings. We've had youth talk about family members being arrested, SWAT going in, kicking down doors, and taking parents away from these kids, right? So these are not light conversations by any means, and it takes a different kind of skill set to actually facilitate those dialogues than some people have.
As a follow-up to that previous question, Chief, is there any movement to integrate the initial training for officers into the academy?
So great question, and really, I don't want to overuse this word intentional, but we expose officers in the academy to these key components. One of our 20 train the trainers is assigned to the academy, a great instructor. And what we have learned over the years is that what officers learn in the academy, it has to be reinforced. It has to be reinforced on the street. Oftentimes, our officer or people that adult learners will learn in order to take a test. Then they'll do a mind purge, so that way they can cram some more information in to take another test. And 6 months of that academy training, we're exposing folks to DMC and RRI and the concepts behind our Bridging the Gap Kids and Cops program, but we're following up with that more intense 8-hour fidelity of the program from the Connecticut model, because that's where officers are now out on the street. They're not trying to please an academy instructor or a field training officer. They're on their own, and that's when they can have the greatest impact. So yes, we expose them to a small dose of this, just so they have an understanding and awareness of it. But I insist that 8-hour effective interactions with youth must take place after they've already completed the academy, after they've already completed their 4-month field training program.
Thank you. The next question that we have is, how is engagement and attendance? Also, are participants provided with a certificate of completion?
Absolutely. So I'm wondering what the question is around engagement. We're constantly recruiting, and that means engaging schools and educators and others in the community to make sure that we have a really good pulse on who needs to be at the table and who needs to be trained. That goes for both youth and for facilitators. The kids really just get 5-hour forums. There's no follow-up. Their schools actually are encouraged to both introduce the topic before we get there and debrief it once we're gone. And then we work regularly with the trainers and with a lot of the same officers for the actual forum. So I would go into more clarification if you felt like we needed to.
And then how many officers that forum?
So we actually strive for about 50 kids. That's about 7 groups of 7 to 10 kids. And we do 1 officer per small group work unless there's an officer being trained, 1 to 2 facilitators. So generally the groups look like 9 to 12 people, and we do 7 groups. We go for 7 groups, not always.
And then this is the parent track, but you can see the certificate of completion, and this one in particular, the folks that participated were over the moon about the program in general, and proud to take a picture with their completion certificate.
Yeah, absolutely. We give out completion certificates to all the youth.
I think that leads nicely into the next question is, have you considered advocating for this program to be a formal part of the educational and civics curriculum of the local schools?
Absolutely. Denver has a really unique situation that I'm told that it's unique for the rest of the country. They really decentralized the school administration, and so individual principals generally get to choose what their curriculum looks like and whether or not it's embedded. So for many of the schools that we work with, I mentioned that we actually do work during the school day and kids get credit for participating. Many of the schools have had to actually have us come in during either a partial day or a makeup day for some kids, or even on a Saturday with incentives. And once we get in there, then they actually do usually incorporate us during the school day the next time around. But we have not been successful in necessarily getting our entire program into all of the junior high or the middle schools and high schools in Denver. But we continue to work on it.
Okay, we have time for probably a couple more questions, at least one. Someone has written, I'd like to bring this to our jurisdiction. Would the chief or his staff be willing to discuss the value of this program with other police agencies?
Yes, we have done that in the past. We encourage other law enforcement agencies to get involved. We see the value in this. It's designed for youth, but again, officers that are learning better ways to communicate to the public, it has benefits far beyond what we originally intended. So I would be more than willing to help communicate the effectiveness that we're seeing and why this is such an impactful program that we're proud to be a part of. We've done that locally here with jurisdictions. We've done it on the phone with other jurisdictions from across the country just to talk about the benefits to implementing something of this nature.
Absolutely. We've already been supporting other jurisdictions and laying the groundwork to be able to do this work. And like I said, first conversations should happen at the local level anyway, because you really need to have, the community actually has to have a really good, solid support base. And officers or law enforcement needs to be at the table during those conversations. And it helps to actually already have an idea of where you're going to get your funding base by the time that we're getting involved. But yeah, we should have our evaluation to send to you. The PERC report is already online, and we have some other kind of marketing materials that we're happy to share with you to start having the conversations in your jurisdictions. Part of what came of the strategic planning was that we really needed to have a plan by year 2, which is really only another year away, for how we kind of export this with lots of fidelity. And that really is going to be labor intensive for us, but we're excited about it, and we're happy to have initial conversations with any jurisdiction that sees value in this project.
Thank you. Before we move on to the conclusion of today's webinar, I just wanted to mention we've had several people write in that they would like us to share today's presentation along with those materials, and we will make sure that we send a packet of information out to each of you who was on the call or on the webinar today. And then also in approximately 30 days, this webinar will be posted on our website, so you will also have access to the actual presentation. So with that said, I would like to thank Chief Payson and Gia for joining us today. I think this has been an excellent opportunity for us to learn about the successful program. And I'm sure it's given many on the webinar in attendance some ideas of some things that can happen in their own cities. So to all of you listening in, thank you again for attending today's session and for taking a moment to complete the online survey that will be sent to you shortly. We are currently developing our 2019 webinar series, which will bring more training than in years past. Please watch your inbox for additional information about the webinar series, including dates and when registration will open. Thank you again to our speakers and to all of you for attending, and we look forward to having you at our next training event.
Thank you.